Okay, so in this part, I'm going to talk about the models I used in emulating for my infographic and how these models gave me the color, text, layout, and alignment that you see in this infographic, and also how that creates unity and variety within the infographic. Yeah, so a lot of topics at once. So yeah, the models, I'm going to give a quick uh, look at my models. So there were four different types of models: a color model, a typography model, a base model, and two layout models. So we're going to start with the color model first. This was it. As you can see, it's really colorful. Lots of different colors. When I was first making my infographic, I was advised to get something really colorful because Pokemon seems like a really colorful topic, and I agreed with that advice. But unfortunately, this infographic being as colorful as it was made it really hard to make a visually pleasing infographic. um, and yeah, there's so many different colors, like so many different colors going on here. Um, and the colors I ended up using, let's see if I can show both of them at the same time. But the colors I ended up using were this pale green, pale pink, and pale yellow, which you see mostly everywhere in my infographic. It's used for encoding in this display, and it's used for encoding in pretty much every display in my infographic. And unfortunately, the encoding isn't uniform because of the data, because each display doesn't really show the exact same type of data. Um, but it is uniform for these two displays, which creates some unity, and it's, I guess you can say, creates variety in the having the other displays not having the same type of encoding, um, or but still having encoding used by the same colors. So there's this little balancing act by like having unity by having the same colors used everywhere, but also having variety because they're used in different ways, or different encodings, but still used for encoding. Next, the most obvious one is this blue background. Not much I have to say about that. It's just a light blue background. The other part is these light green maps, which I use for the two map displays. I'll mention more about this later, but I did debate whether I should stick with the pale green, red, and yellow for coloring the maps and like maybe make the maps green, or if I should introduce a new color. I ended up introducing a new color, and I think it again does this little balancing act between unity and variety in that it creates unity between these two displays, the two map displays, but it also creates variety in that like pretty much everywhere else in the infographic these colors aren't seen, so it really, I think it looks a lot better than having pretty much the entire infographic be the exact same colors. Um, Now, lastly, for the color model is the text. So one bad thing about this color model is that the text is pretty much all the same color. It's just black, with the exception of a little bit of red right here for emphasis. I don't really know why magic and fries were emphasized, but for some reason they were. And yeah, so I use pretty much just black text everywhere in this infographic. And the one time I use a different color, this red text was just to emphasize something important, which is Pokemon. Um, it's a little bit boring, I think, but at the same time, it works well with the rest of the infographic, which is so colorful, that having something kind of really normal looking, like just plain black text, really adds a counterbalance to what would otherwise be way too colorful. So, yeah, I mentioned a little bit about the general feel of this infographic, and the general feel of this is that it's just really colorful, really bright and cheerful. Using these pale colors kind of gave a more what I feel like a more childlike, kind of safe feeling to it. Something that you'd probably see like in a daycare or like kind of Eastery actually, and I feel like that goes really well with this topic because Pokemon is mostly geared towards children, and it's also really, really colorful thing. So yeah, that's my color model. Oh, I should also mention the color harmony. So like I mentioned, it's pretty colorful. One of the challenges about this design is that I feel like the colors could really clash with each other. It might be too colorful. And when you look at the color harmony, yeah, you can kind of see that. Like, it's kind of complementary, but really, like, maybe you can say it's complementary, but really, it's like three different colors on three different parts of the color wheel. So it was really challenging to make this in a visually pleasing way, to use all these different colors at once. And I think one of the weaknesses of this infographic is that it still might not be the most visually pleasing because the colors kind of don't really combine in the best way. But at the same time, it's also something very unique about this infographic, all these different colors used at once. Alright, I did not set a timer, but let's try to go over the next two models. So I used the same model for my typography and my base model, which is this one. It's about Pokemon, but it's a very different topic in the Pokemon series than what I covered, so I think it's still different enough. The typography for this is really simple. It's basically just the same font everywhere. I assume this is Arial Narrow, which is what I used everywhere else in my infographic. And it comes in two flavors, Arial Narrow Bold and the normal version. Bold is used for the title and headings, like it is in my infographic, and the regular version I use pretty much everywhere else for annotating and body text. The only exception is that I use bold a little bit right here on the time display, because I just felt it would be really, there's just so much information going on here that making some things bold would just help viewers better comprehend this information. So yeah, going into the more in-depth of like how this text is used, like I mentioned, bold, Arial, narrow is used for headings, and regular one is used for labels, pretty much in all the number displays, and yeah, label for encodings, and then it's also used in a little bit smaller size for body text and annotations. So it's used that way in the map. And in the timeline, it's actually the same size, but it's just not bold, so it's a little bit more noticeable, like which is the body text and which is the more important, like generation, times. I did this way so that, because everything kind of is just as important, but in a quick glance, you can see, because of the bolding, you can see what the generations are and what the dates are real quickly. And you can use that with association with the icons. So that's the next part of this, is the base model. And it was the same as the text model. There were three different styles of icons I used. The first one was this, the title icon, which is very similar to this one's title icon. It's a little bit more detailed. It has this white border, and it's kind of 2D, kind of 3D. It's like 2.5D. And yeah, because of the details, it's the most eye-catching, which I think is really important for visual hierarchy, that the title is the most eye-catching because it really just shows what this infographic is about. Secondly, I use these icons in the number display. This is the only really number display or any other display besides the timeline that I use the icons in. And these are really much simpler, much flatter 2D icons, kind of like this one, kind of like the ones right here, and the ones right here, just a little bit less detailed. They're more like silhouettes, and I think it was really important to use icons for the number display because, as I'll explain later, these icons really illustrate each generation, and it just makes it a little bit more visually pleasing than just having like plain bars. Now, lastly is the icons in the time display. This one's a lot more complex than these, but not as complex as the heading, the title icon, and I think that was really important because the time display is so important, crucial for this infographic that it needed to draw a lot more attention. So what I used to emulate were these really little nice little circular things. that really just use two colors, but within those, or three colors if you include white, and I don't know how to say it. Like, it's two colors. It's white and this color, and this color is used in two different ways. One's a light way and one's a dark way. And with that, it really shows off a lot of details, while at the same time being somewhat simple. So these are also kind of like 2.5D icons with white backgrounds and white borders. And I used the same colors I used for encoding um, in the timeline. But then for the individual icons, I made them a little bit darker. But it still is the same color. It's not a different color. So I thought that was really important because the icons really illustrate what the games are. These are the mascots for the games. So yeah, that might be something else I go a little bit more in depth when I go into the timeline. Last part, layout models. There are two layout models. They're both very similar. They're both landscape orientation, and they both kind of have these little boxes that encase each individual part. Each individual part of the infographic. The only difference is this one has the boxes arranged into two columns and with the vertical space in the middle, whereas this one, there's kind of columns, but then there's also just a lot more variety. I went with this one as my emulation because unfortunately, you know, not everything in my infographic is the same length, but they are kind of the same height. So if we zoom out a little bit, you can see the layout of this. So everything's kind of encased in a box, just like it is in the models, and they create these rows because they're all about the same height, or each element in each row is about the same height. But they don't really create columns. I mean, these two elements with the headings alone kind of create a column, but the entire displays don't. But yeah, that's the layout display. Let me see if there's anything else I should mention about it. I could compare, like, basically, like there's a timeline right here at the very bottom, and there's three displays that create a column or a row right here. The timeline kind of combines the three displays into one row. So that's one difference between this model and my my infographic. But another one thing that's really similar is the title, which is on the top left, just like here. And then there's also this row right here, which is a little bit smaller and has these various different displays in the middle, and that's also done right here. And the map, just coincidentally, the map is on the top right, right next to the title. And yeah, I think that's it. Hopefully I didn't go over like I did last time. I'm going to stop, and next time I'm going to go more in depth on each of the individual displays.